It's league night, everybody, and tonight we're going to be talking about all things world champions, and World Championship 2022. What an epic event that was. We're here with Josh as usual, and we're also excited to welcome back Dion. He is now a regular host here on League Night, bringing the valuable insights as he does from Statmando and his experience on the course. Find out more about Dion. Follow him on social media. Maybe you'll learn a thing or two about disc golf. Wow, guys, the 2022 PDGA World Championships did not disappoint. There were a lot of storylines going in, but only two massive storylines. Well, we'll say two massive winners coming out, that being KRISTIN, TATTAR. The largest margin of victory in how long, Dion? Ever?
It's been a few years. So there were some larger ones in the past, but we'll get to that later about how good of a performance that was.
Yeah, and Paul McBeth now claiming his third experience with a playoff in the PDGA World Championships and able to secure his sixth world title. So congratulations to KRISTIN with her first and Paul with his sixth. Aaron GOSSAGE definitely gets a shout out there, as well as a few other competitors, HENNA, BLOMROOS. Man, the storylines, as I mentioned, the drama, the excitement, I could feel it, the live production, all of it included. We're going to get right into it. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. Let's start out with our top 10 moments. Now, there were a lot more than 10 moments, everybody. We had to pick 10 here. We're going to pick our 5 FPO top moments. Let's start with KRISTIN TATTAR, her 84-foot. We're going to call it a throw-in. Here it is. Definitely not a full...
Bang, bang.
Matt, you know it went in, right? We've all done it. You know it went in because she like bent her body and put her leg up, right? And that little extra at the end put the disc in the basket.
Celebration. That's round 4.
Yeah, it's great seeing the emotion too, right? Like we obviously know she can have emotion, but she's usually pretty consistent and steady. But that felt good. Yeah, and that was, by the way, that was an important putt. Competition was really catching up. And this kind of just felt like putting the hammer down.
Absolutely. Hole 14 in round 4, you're starting to crank it down to the last round, and every putt matters. Let's go to HENNA BLOMROOS. Round 4, an eagle on hole 3. Here's her drive, and we'll see her putt. She has elite distance when it comes to the FPO division. I have had the privilege of filming her during a Disc Golf Pro Tour event, and I was impressed. That's not saying much with the distance I have, but being able to throw this shot in a par 4 and watch for her putt. I mean, it's not quite a drop in, but there you go, an eagle for HENNA BLOMROOS.
Ever so slightly downhill, but that distance is still awesome. And Matt, that'll certainly help your stats. I think she gained 38 strokes tee to green.
Yeah, her driving was elite this week, the best in the field by far, and really showcased what the FPO field is capable of.
Absolutely. Number 3, Evelina has been struggling with her putt. She has been vocal about that herself. But in round 4, hole number 10, look at this. From the woods, Evelina for the big putt. Look at her face as she walks it in here, or runs it in. She's pretty happy with herself.
That's got to feel good. Hey, in all seriousness too, even though it maybe sounds like a joke, like I almost think she needs that kind of challenge to shake up the mental game, because the 15 to 20 footer obviously is still a problem right now. But think about it, this dynamic, we know she can throw the disc. And so we put her in a different kind of challenge where the mental game was not probably the same as it is for a 20-foot putt, and look at that. So anyway, that's a fun shot, hence it made our list.
Absolutely. And that was number 3 for us. Number 4, Owen Scoggin struggling with groin pain, surprises herself with a big putt here in round 4 on hole 14. Look at surprised herself.
And I don't think we have the audio here. We don't need it, but I think
Are you kidding me? She said.
Yeah, she's just like surprised by herself. And by the way, it's that attitude that helps her persist through other challenges, like limping towards the basket, but just still being happy to be on the course.
Here, watch as she reacts to the camera real quick. Like, did you see
kidding
that?
me?
But we're not surprised, honestly. How many times does Owen have a putt like that? A lot.
Oh, we brought the audio in a little bit. Thank you, producer Ben. Let's go to round 5, hole 18, when KRISTIN taps in for the win. We did not show every clip, obviously, but here is the crowning moment in the FPO division, the number 1 when it comes to the FPO at the World Championships. Congratulations.
Yeah,
Look
quite
at that.
A moment.
KRISTIN TATTAR taking down her first, I say first because we can talk about it, first World Championship title. Let's listen to her interview here after the win.
Real. I don't know if somebody can wake me up from this dream. I don't know. It's crazy.
Well, speaking of dreams, when did you envision that you could become a world champion? When did this process start for you?
I thought about it a lot during off season, and this dream kept me going when it was tough. So yeah, I've been thinking about it almost every day, and now I'm here and I achieved it. So it's definitely a dream come true.
And then as you walked over to the island on hole number 16, Paige hugged you.
Real. I don't know if somebody can wake me up from this dream. I don't know. It's crazy.
All right. So
speaking of dreams,
we cut off Terry there, but Terry said that Paige came around and said, I wish I could have been there to see it. And I think that's important for Paige to realize that she wasn't there and she wanted to be, and it was her own doing, not allowing her to be there. But congratulations to KRISTIN. Let's go to our MPO 5, which means we're getting into our top 10 here, starting with round 5. Paul throws OB. We're going to look at a little bit here of a sequence of events. And then it's parked by Aaron GOSSAGE. Hole 15, a 2-stroke swing. Paul hits the tree and it rolls to OB. Fans everywhere holding their breath, can't believe what just happened. And then GOSSAGE goes, I have a moment. And I think commentary says, barn doors wide open.
Yeah, and the reason, I mean, this kind of moment, which maybe is actually 2 moments back to back, and clearly, by the way, Matt, I know you acknowledged at the beginning, but think about how many shots happened in the first 4 rounds. But I think we all know, truthfully, the top 5 moments came from the last 4 holes of the tournament. They just did. Or maybe 5 holes, I guess, right? 15, 16, 17, 18, and then 16. So, but this turn of events is so crazy. Imagine being Paul with the lead, and in 1 hole and only 3 holes left, Aaron GOSSAGE also must be surprised to find himself in that position. And that's a pivotal moment. It's a turning point, if you want to call it that.
Before we get into the next sequence here, next moment, Dion, Paul had mentioned pain, cramping in his lower leg. And he said that he had to shift and change his putt style. We even saw a little bit of his form change. Like, how much do you think that plays into something like this when you're throwing OB? I know it's the last round and you're in the last couple of holes.
Well, he had commented on that earlier in the event in one of his post-round interviews, where he described the need to make the adjustment, but also how he needed to trust himself. And he was referring to going to the straddle putt instead of the stagger stance in light of the leg injury. So that can shake you, but Paul was prepared. He had to make these adjustments all week. So I don't think the form was the issue for him, but the 2-stroke swing late in the game, going into the last stretch of holes, being up 1 and now you're down 1. That was a huge moment to see.
Absolutely. So let's take it again. We're staying in round 5 with all of these to hole 16. Everyone knows this hole, the island hole. GOSSAGE misses his putt. Now, congratulations to him for having the courage to go for that. Paul hits his putt. Let's take a look at this. And Paul steps up and goes, I have to make this putt. And he just watched as Aaron missed. Let's see what he does here. I think we know, but yeah. He steps up with ice in his veins.
Well, this is what's crazy is it's this sequence, it was literally a battle. We know golf is you against the course, but I feel like these holes they were against each other, and that's why these clips are built as moments together. Hole 15, right? Back-to-back stroke swing. Hole 16, Aaron misses, Paul hits. These moments are building. And the crazy, which is, my statement here is obvious, but in golf, every hole that you play, the margins for error tighten, right? Because you have 3 holes left. Now you have 2 holes left, right? And it just keeps getting tighter and tighter, which means the pressure ups. So these moments are a big, big deal.
Absolutely. Let's go to hole 17, the following hole. Paul's second shot is described as being undoable. I'm trying to think of the right words by all, but maybe Paul in this scenario. And Paul is able to execute it. In fact, this shot here is harder than the putt, but it sets it up to a must get. And he was able to do that. Let's look at how this flight unfolded, flew for Paul.
Unreal shot from Paul, being able to clear the OB on 17. And right before this, Aaron had blasted his drive way up the fairway and was in a much better position. And then Paul had this putt.
Yeah, I don't want to talk over because it's so amazing, but
But here we go.
Well, hey, watch this too. I know it's really unrelated, but we already know what's going to happen. Watch the double fist pump, kind of the jump. I'm telling you, it's the same exact motion that Paul had on USDGC playoff hole. I think facing the other direction, possibly. But it's just like, I think Paul knew the size of the moment.
Well,
right?
it seemed uncontrolled. For the split second, there was an uncontrolled celebration, which was like, I did what I needed to do. And then it was, I'm going to compose myself because it's not over. But you could see, I felt like there was a little bit of uncontrolled celebration just for that split second. And he's like, all right, like I got to compose myself here. But let's do that. Let's go over to hole number 18. GOSSAGE parks his upshot, which, by the way, we've seen him make a mistake not to get as close in previous rounds. But he was able to execute the shot that he said he practiced. And he puts it to within 20 feet.
And from what I've heard, so this is secondhand, but the technical execution of this shot, there are not many players who would even attempt this, right? Like a forehand spike hyzer, really over that tree, the downhill slope, but I mean, perfection. And we talked about the margins of error getting tighter and tighter. There's really no margin of error.
So we just saw that moment right there. Paul misses his putt. In fact, he had to get the birdie there to win. But what an amazing opportunity for Paul to have a putt to win. It was in his control. And to put it low, I think was the right move. He does not want to roll away. But man, I think he was fully committed is my point. I don't think he was intentionally trying to be safe with the putt. That's not Paul McBeth's way. But they go to a playoff. Aaron says in a post-round interview, he says, I was feeling so incredibly nervous. My body could barely take it. I wasn't even sure what was happening next, except maybe I gave myself a chance to go a little bit further. And so there's something to be said here as we talk later about experience. But let's go to hole 16, the playoff. You can see here, Aaron throws off on the island shot. And his disc, he said, out of his hand, he knew was no good. Out of his hand. OB, not in the water. Some discussion about how OB lines are marked. We're not going to do that tonight. No. But he is disappointed to know that really there's no chance he can the putt from the drop zone. But Paul is able to execute his shot. Can you imagine the nerves that maybe even Paul was feeling? Ice in his veins, able to put it to about what you can see there, you know, just at circle's edge. Aaron gives it a bid to try to force Paul to hit the putt.
Unreal effort by Aaron GOSSAGE. What a moment
Paul
here.
takes it down. That's his
Right.
victory. Congratulates Aaron and says he'll be
PDGA
here
World
more
Champions.
times in this.
Paul McBeth.
Look at the emotion here. I think actually, let's see as the TD and the president of Dynamic Disc come over to hug him. Paul goes, no, I want Hannah. I want to give Hannah a hug. And so that's what happens right here. And let's go ahead and cut to the interview. You're going to see emotion out of Paul that we do not see very often, if ever. Let's check out the interview.
Most emotional I've ever seen you for a winning putt. Tell us what this means.
It means a lot, man. I was in Aaron's shoes last year, and man, I feel for him because it's tough. It's tough, but I know he'll bounce back. And I mean, I still struggled, you know. I still was not that good from the putting green, but I just found a way to push through and just continue to somehow get him to go in and put myself in this position. So I don't know, like you said, you know, I'm pretty emotional right now.
How do you dig deep to clutch up in the way that you did on hole 17, a putt you just referenced? You had the very errant mistake on 15, which was surprising, but then 2 holes later on 17, you make it from outside of circle 2. Where were you digging deep for that?
I just told myself, you got to will this one in there. Whatever you have, just will it in there. Give it everything you have. And I was able to drop that one on 17. It gave me kind of a cushion on 18. But
So often we hear you talk about how you want to chase down Kenny, how you want the most majors, you want to be the greatest of all time without question. What does it mean to get one step closer with one more world title?
Man, I mean, it's awesome, you know, but I just wish he was more present. You know, you see a lot of those greatest of all time, and they're present. So I want Kenny to be more present.
You
You've
can
looked up
hear
to a
when
lot
he
of
was
people,
asked.
maybe even
You
Kenny,
can
one
hear
of
when
those.
he was asked
as I
about
know you
Kenny,
spent
he has
some time in Florida.
disappointment in his voice. Let's go ahead and move into our next segment here. But the disappointment in Paul's voice when he was asked, did you hear it? He was like, he has that like disappointment. And you can tell that he sees Ken Climo as an awesome figure for the sport, but he wishes that he was more present. I'm going to take that at face value. I know there's been conversation going around. How did you guys read that comment?
Yeah, well, Kenny was not that, it's not that long ago that he was active and a competitor. And as Paul was in his early days of MPO, Timo was somebody he had to battle against. So it's fresh in Paul's mind. It might not be as fresh for some of our viewers, but it's fresh in Paul's mind that he used to compete against this guy, that this guy was the champ, was the best of all time. He looked up to him, he admired him, and he wants him to be around. And I think it was a genuine sentiment from that perspective.
Absolutely. Imagine Gannon Burr, Josh, okay, 10 years down the road saying Paul McBeth is not even at all present anywhere. We don't have a clue what's going on with Paul McBeth. Do you see someone like in Gannon Burr's shoes and down in the future being able to say something similar? Is that how you see Paul saying this?
Yeah, well, I've been waiting to hear Paul maybe provide some additional commentary, because I would love to hear him elaborate a bit, because I think there are ways to think about it. At the end of the day, yeah, what I took, one, face value, like, yeah, I just wish Ken was around more. And then I also see it really as a comment of respect, to be quite honest, because he's like, he is one of the greats, and implied, I am one of the greats, and I wish we could actually be here together. You know, and so that's how I kind of took it, is like, yeah, you know, that's an interesting sentiment. I think he probably surprised a lot of people with that response.
It was not prepared for the victory speech, but it was something that Paul had obviously thought about to that point, because it came out authentically. Let's go ahead and move into our next segment, which is not looking at the highlights. By the way, had we been able to fit 100 highlights in there, we could have done that for the World Championship. Yeah. There were a lot of incredible highlights.
Yeah, and just because there's not enough time in the show, Matt, we didn't prep for it, but like, you know, there were 6 aces at this World Championships. There were ace runs. Like players we haven't mentioned, like Holland Hanley making the podium. Plenty of other players who probably deserve some commentary for something amazing they did, truthfully. And there's way more than 10, but we chose to limit it. So I know that's what you're saying, Matt, but I had to mention
Ezra
a few names.
Aderhold, hole 12, the second hardest hole on the course. That's incredible. If you don't know that hole, I mean, he had to throw over 400 feet, 450-ish feet to ace. Let's move into our segment, though. We're going to talk 10 takeaways from the World Championships. These are 10 items that we feel like should deserve some discussion beyond just looking at a highlight clip and reacting. Josh, we just saw Paul McBeth's emotion after winning his 6th world title. Can you tell us about that? What does number 6 mean for Paul McBeth?
All right, so I'm going to comment a little on the legacy of Paul McBeth now that he has 6 world champions and plenty of other majors. Look, the competitive scene has shifted over the last decade, obviously, and even more probably in the last 3-ish years, you know, even just last year, right? We have many more competitors in the scene who can get hot and make a run. We've seen that, right? There is virtually no margin for error. Arguably in the past, maybe there was, the margins were a little looser, even though the competition may have still been high. You've all heard the stat, 10 straight world championships since he won his first in 2012, where he's either finished first or second place. Look, in that time period, a 60% win rate over the last 10 worlds. For me, Paul's legacy, here's really my opinion piece here. It's about his desire and his will to win, paired, of course, with the ability to execute under pressure. That is where his legacy is forming, in my opinion. Look, we can debate physical skills because many people actually have that and the number's growing, right? Or we can debate technology of discs and the equipment we use, but that's accessible to everybody. But the mental aspect is huge here. And this is where I think Paul is cementing his legacy. Look, I'm going to give you a list of points and then I'll be done. And tell me that these things don't accumulate as a significant mental challenge, but Paul steps up each time and shows us what he's made of. Listen to this. How about his own internal self-imposed expectations? How about external expectations? Everybody expects him to show up, even his haters and those who say he's washed up. How about he knows the building streak of finishing first or second? He's having an off year this year, and he knows that. And here he is coming into the World Championships. He just finished an amazing performance of the European Open, one of the best ever, and still lost. How about remembering the way last World Championships ended for him? Or a cramp in his calf during this tournament causing problems, putting struggles that were obvious. I saw some of the worst putts I've ever seen from Paul during this tournament, changing his putting stroke throughout. He started the last round down 3 strokes, a gap that's never been closed in a final round in the World Championships. And we saw hole 15 throwing a bogey, immediately rebounding on the next 2 holes with maybe some of their most clutch shots on 17. And then hole 16 playoff. Do you remember last year? It was a hole 16 playoff, an island with water around it. All of these things have to build up. Paul knows this context, the ability to fight through that. I understand the debate between eras. Look, but from what I'm seeing now, Paul is building a truly unique legacy that is setting himself apart from everybody else. And I'm not actually debating the term GOAT in this context. I'm simply saying Paul's legacy is one for the ages.
Yeah, one for the ages, absolutely. So we're going to move into our next. I'm not even going to give reaction. Josh set it up perfectly there. Well, let's move into Aaron Gossage. So Aaron Gossage, this guy is in his 2nd season touring full-time. He's known disc golf for a while. This is his 2nd full-time touring season. Last year's World Championships, he placed 25th, which I think is fantastic. At this point in the history of the sport, 25th is extremely positive for him. Coming out in his 2nd ever performance of the World Championships and battling to a playoff and taking 2nd place speaks volumes of his potential. Now, let's get out there. The courses were built for him. He acknowledges that. There are courses that are not suitable for his strengths. These courses were built for him, but he had a solid game plan that even Paul McBeth stole from. And I'm using the word stole lightly there. But Paul McBeth himself reviewed how was Aaron shooting the rounds he was shooting and thought there were some great takeaways there. Now, disc golf, I already mentioned where it's at in his history is really important to recognize here because you may not come away with as many wins in a season as we once saw from Paul and Ricky and Ken and all these other players in the past. The game is at a different place. If you're getting a win that is monumental for your career from this point going forward, if you're placing podiums, that is incredibly strong for your career. And Aaron to do 2nd at Worlds needs to be judged very highly. You look at, let me see his other performances here. OTB, 3rd place. DDO this year, 3rd place. This year alone, he has 3 podium finishes at big events, World being the largest. I think we have to judge him for what it is. There are poor performances, but in this day and age, getting any podium finish is a strong player. I will say this, he enjoys mountain biking if you didn't know that. And I think something says he likes the outdoors, his ability to focus in nature and throw his disc hard. He is known for his power forehands and throwing hard backhands, as most Colorado. How do you say that, Dion? Is it Coloradians?
Oh,
Those native to Colorado. Those native to Colorado. You're closer than I am on the map, so I was just going to see if you knew. All right, Dion, let's go ahead and let's talk about our next takeaway here, which is going to be specifically talking about, oh, no, it's me, playoff experience. I will pass it back to get some of your insight here, but when it comes to playoff experience, I already mentioned this, Paul McBeth, this is his 3rd time. He did it in 2014 against Ricky. He did it last year, and then he steps up this year, back-to-back years with playoff experience. I think it's invaluable. You cannot buy experience. Experience has to be earned. It has to be something gone through. And last year, HENNA McBeth, his wife, refers to it as being a traumatic experience. The way the whole sequence of events went down, from the throw-in from James Conrad to losing the playoff, the way it went down. Paul stepped up, faced it, threw the shot he needed and won. I think that comes largely in part to his experience, something that Aaron didn't have. Now, just to throw it out there, and I'll get your guys' insight on this. There's only a handful of players in the history of the sport, the full history, that have experience in the playoffs. These are the few that do. Aaron Gossage now does, but James Conrad last year, Ricky Wysocki, Josh Anthon, Avery Jenkins, and that's back to 2009. That's our current list who still might be able to take that experience to a World Championships. You have to go all the way back to 1987 to find anything previous to that with Greg Hosfeld and Michael Sullivan. Now, that being said, Paul had the most experience. Do you think it was an advantage for him, Dion, going into hole 16?
Oh, undoubtedly. I mean, he's been there not only before, but he was here last year, and it was an excellent time to exercise those demons. But huge props to Aaron Gossage for collecting that experience. And even though he didn't win, which I know is going to be terribly frustrating for him, he can take a massive amount of positivity forward from this event and hold his chin up high.
Yeah, and the interesting debate here, and if there is one to be made, we can make a debate out of anything on league night. Josh, traumatic experience. Do you think that could make some players shake in their boots as opposed to stepping up and rising to the challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say the experience here is unique because it wasn't all positive. But that's why I was actually commenting earlier about that context. I think Paul, and there's probably others, right? I think you can make a case there are others, but has the mental fortitude to face that again and to execute when he had to. And sure, he had the benefit of what happened when GOSSAGE's throw going out of bounds, but Macbeth still had to execute. And experience in the playoffs, yes, but overall experience at a high level, it's not also right the first time that Paul's had to make a shot, right, to try to win a major. I think that's a big deal.
Okay, we're bringing you more takeaways from Worlds, and we're going to focus in on the FPO and their performance. Dion, is this the best FPO performance we've seen at a World Championship? What do you think?
Well, I'm going to lead with a number, lead with one stat, and that is this is the first time that an FPO player has averaged over 1,000 during the course of a World Championships. I believe the previous record was Paige Pierce at a 998, so very close. And I believe Evan from Statmando is going to hate me for forgetting the exact year, but I think it was 2015. And he'll correct me in the chat here in a moment if I'm wrong. So it's been a while since we've seen this high of a performance from FPO. And in my mind, the types of things that characterize this as, in my opinion, the best performance at a World Championships is the amount of consistency, determination, steadiness, and execution across 5 rounds on challenging courses. And KRISTIN absolutely dominated.
Okay, so it's interesting coming from a numbers person. You see the numbers and you're saying it is. Josh, how do you feel with the eye test?
Well, it passes the eye test for me as well. So that's my gut. The only hesitation is each year's right relative performance, which I understand what the rating is supposed to calculate, but you just wonder, right? Like you'd have to go back and remember, right? Some of those really impressive battles between Paige and Katrina, and were any of those maybe more kind of quote unquote impressive, but with way Dion positioned it about steady, consistent, high performance, if that's kind of the bar, then I think, yeah, it has to be one of the best, most impressive, at least in recent memory, to be fair to those further back in the history of our sport.
All right. Well, we talked a little bit about early on when we were looking at highlights. Paul was struggling with some form of physical ailment. He mentioned it. He mentioned cramping. I think he even indicated there might have been colored bruising of some sort, which is interesting. Josh, fighting through adversity, we see it in sports at all high levels. There are a lot of critical moments that have taken people to World Championships or World Series or the playoffs or to win some crowning moment. What was this like? What do you think Paul had to do to fight through the adversity here?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know exactly because we don't know the extent of the injury, but I think in general, I'm going to even mention a few other players. And before I mention those names, I just think like this is part of what we love about sports performance. Nobody wants somebody to get hurt, but think about epic, like historical sports performances. Often it comes, right, we find out either during or afterwards that such player was fighting through some injury. And what I think is unique here is many of the physical challenges that are faced can actually be overcome with a strong mental game, which goes back to some of the theme we've been talking about. Think of some of these examples in this tournament. KRISTIN TATTAR, early in the year, arm issues. You could see on social media really kind of mentally struggling with that challenge and how to approach it. And that had to be a factor coming into this for her. Paul Macbeth in the middle of the tournament, has this issue with his calf that's interrupting his normal routines. We saw Owen Scoggins during this tournament kind of limping off and on in some of the early rounds, still finished fairly strong. And then, unfortunately, I'm going to call him out because we see Eagle McMahon, who a lot of people had really high picks for him, and he has since talked about it after the tournament, but he faced adversity by getting a piece of glass to kind of cut his hand, not enough to have him to withdraw from the tournament, but enough to throw him off his game. And from that point forward, I think it derailed his entire tournament performance. And I think he would acknowledge it, that really that was a mental struggle. And so, look, everybody's going to face adversity at the top of the game because you're pushing up against the upper limits. It's kind of like a rev limiter. Everybody is pushing as hard as possible. It's how you respond to those physical challenges that shows us the difference. So I just think it's intriguing. It's fun to watch that in the sports. And what we saw this weekend kind of shed some light on that.
Yeah, I don't know if either of you have a favorite sports moment where a player fought through adversity. I know people get sick and they have other injuries. Anything come to your minds? No? For me,
Well,
Kurt
there's so
Schilling.
yeah.
Kurt Schilling's
I was
bloody
thinking of the Kurt
sock
Schilling
in
bloody
the
sock.
Red Sox World Series.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a moment to me. It was a moldable moment in my life. It stands out. But
Yeah,
it's,
I mean,
it's
right, the
definitely
Michael
something.
Jordan flu game, or you can go
Mhm.
back to a totally different arena in sports and go to like Olympics, right? Women's gymnastics and the vault from Carrie Strug, right? Getting literally carried off the mat because her ankle's destroyed, but she still executed. I mean, so it goes on. And those always, in my opinion here, Paul's calf doesn't rise to the level of some of those. But the point is over 5 rounds, that has got to be mentally taxing. And you see some players have the ability to push through and some players do not. And that's really the point for raising
But here's, and I wanted to say, because you mentioned maybe it doesn't rise to that level, but there was something significant enough that caused him to change his stance and change his form in the throws. And when that's the case, you do not do that in a world championship unless you feel like it's for your benefit. And if it was, I think there was a significant enough issue there. Let's talk about the courses. This is another takeaway. A lot of conversation existing around course types. All year this happens. We found ourselves at 2 fairly wide open courses, one being a country club, the Emporia Country Club, which we've seen represented at DDO, and the other, Jones Supreme. We saw that represented earlier in the year at DDO as well. Dion, as a former touring player, what do you think about a course like this? Give us your insight.
Well, I was researching for this segment and the thought occurred to me. I said, gosh, let me just look up where Kansas ranks in terms of natural beauty in the 50 United States. And would you believe it? The very first site I checked, Thrillist.com, has Kansas ranked number 50 out of 50 in natural beauty in the United States. So it has that going against it. And when
Nice.
people say they don't like the courses at Worlds, I think what they are really saying is they don't like looking at the courses at Worlds. So that would be the overall theme to me, is that these are not aesthetically pleasing courses to watch. It's Kansas. You're going to get what you're going to get. But I'm going to have to applaud Eric McCabe as the designer for making courses that are challenging and create the type of experience that we saw at Worlds, where the last few holes mattered in the MPO division, and there was a lot of people close in that battle. So I think the courses were great for World Championships in terms of setting up the type of competition and the exciting finish that we saw. If I were to grade the course maybe a little bit more narrower in my criteria, I've got some notes here. This is what I'm thinking. It doesn't provide for great shot shaping opportunities. It's a lot of single angle throws and landing zones to avoid OB. So that's where you have a player like Aaron GOSSAGE, who has both the hyzer forehand and backhand with distance. He's excelling at a course like this because he can spike it into that landing zone wherever he wants to. And you didn't get to see the type of shot making, either threading through a gap or the S-curve shots that makes watching disc golf more exciting. So I think those were sort of the intangible things that make these courses not everyone's favorites, not particularly great to look at, but with what is there on the property, very good courses are carved out. Just missing the types of things like wooded fairways that are going to create more interesting shot shapes.
Yeah, so people wouldn't mind, I believe, seeing Portland Open again. What a beautiful course that was laid out for this year. They wouldn't mind seeing Smuggler's Notch, Fox Run, and Brewster Ridge, or Maple Hill repeated multiple times in a year, because aesthetically it looks pleasing. I think there's something interesting here that you brought up, and I feel like the course design itself is great, but the Disc Golf Pro Tour exists to put the players on a platform for the fans to see and to applaud the skills that they're watching. It can be difficult to keep a track of where the players are actually throwing without those shaped fairways. I don't have a strong opinion either way here. Josh, do you have anything to say in regards to Dion's opinion there?
I mean, I mostly agree, so I'm not going to add anything that's crazy. I just think as the sport continues to grow, if it grows on the same trajectory, which may or may not be possible, but in another 10 years, ask yourself, is that exactly the kind of course we're going to be playing on? And my answer is like, probably not, which is an interesting challenge given where Emporia sits and what they've done for disc golf. But I do think their courses, as far as what we saw from a competition standpoint, it was thrilling and I had no problems with the design. And so in many ways, I'm thankful for it.
Great. All right, let's move into our next takeaway here. Island holes. We've seen our fair share of island holes on tour in large moments. Last year being included at the World Championships when James was able to secure his first world title. I think island holes produce an interesting opportunity for stroke swing. The point being that you have a player you're rooting for, and you're thinking we're getting down to the last holes, but there's still a chance that 16, the leader makes a mistake, and we're able to get the stroke swing that we needed. So it brings drama, it brings excitement, it brings a feeling of hope. Again, like I said, when your player's down, that there's still a chance. But I think this is interesting. We talked about the experience of playoffs. I'm going to bring you kind of my twist on this topic of island holes. I've seen some discussion on this, and my opinion is that I do not love a playoff starting on an island hole. I asked Aaron Gossage following the tournament, do you like starting on an island hole? Now, what do you think he would say, obviously, after throwing out of bounds to lose the world championship? But he says, give me the par 4. Give me a tough par 3 where if we execute our shaped shot, we're able to have still the putt chance, even if we don't make the green. I like that perspective. I would like to see the players executing great shots, and you can argue that an island requires that, but also the ability to hit big putts and keep the playoff progressing. To my mindset, put the island hole 3 or 4 holes in. If we haven't settled it by that point, let's throw something up there to maybe kind of make it a little quicker. What's your takeaway, Dion? Island holes.
Well, this goes back to the previous conversation around the courses. When you have the topography that you do in Kansas, these are the types of holes that get created. And I think hole 1 at Jones is an example of island holes I'm not a fan of, right? It's an artificial island. It's actually the hardest par 3 on tour, under 300 feet by a significant margin, and it's forcing either the birdie or the bogey outcome. And I don't think that's a great way to open up the event or the round. I do like hole 16 because it's a beautiful island. It looks more natural, and it creates a type of emotional aspect of playing that hole that you want to see in competition. I would not start a playoff with an island hole to that same point, and I think it could be the 3rd or 4th hole, which will, more than likely settle the playoff.
Okay, great. I'm glad you brought up the starting hole Jones. I know there's been a discussion on that as well. Put that later in the course, change the fairway a little bit, create different opportunities. But Josh, hole 8 at Maple Hill, the 8 holes have made that hole iconic. It is an island shot. Hole 17 at Winthrop Gold, iconic. We've seen a lot of moments go down there. Last year at the Fort, the moment that went down there. Hole 16 here, claiming a world title on an island hole. What do island holes bring to the sport in your mind?
I mean, I love it. I'm not going to discount all the other points you've made, right? Like finding out where it is in the course, how it's designed, all those things. But you're just going to ask me in general island holes. As a fan, that's what I'm answering as. I'm going to say I love it because it creates some excitement. It's simple to see and understand. And all of us amateur level players are terrified of the thought, and it's just amazing to see these players execute it time and time again. And you know what, Matt, you brought up what Aaron Gossage gave. He wants a par 4, but I know the quote and segment you're talking about, and I think he also acknowledged, but he knows what the fans want is something like that. So I'm going to go against maybe what you and Dion would say, and I think it was thrilling. Move right to that hole, give us some excitement, and I loved it.
Island holes are definitely for the fans. I think we can all agree on that. It tests the skill, but man, the stroke swings and all that for those who are not able or willing to throw the shot is what it comes down to. Let's move into surprise overperformers. It's an interesting place in the sport, Dion. We're seeing a lot of overperformers every tournament. I think the sport has just introduced a lot of new talent, but who's overperforming at the World Championships this year, Dion?
Sure. So I'll give a couple of numbers here to back this down. Obviously, the top overperformer, if it's not in everybody's mind, is Aaron Gossage, right? Taking 2nd place and tying after regulation for the world title. That's incredible. So apart from that, let's just look at some people who played above their rating and if that was special for them or if there's anything noteworthy about it. Tristan Tanner, who also podiumed at this event, out of the B pool, the best B pool finish at a Worlds ever, averaged 46.6 points above his rating for the duration of the event, meaning every round of those 5 rounds was on average 46 points above his rating. So he's a player that we know has a high ceiling. His player rating itself had sort of slipped in the past year, had some poor performances dealing with injury and whatnot, but that was just by far the best overperformance in terms of Worlds. We also had Jake Mon, who averaged 32 points above his rating, another B-pool player, a name that I was not familiar with, you at home probably weren't familiar with. He was the highest placing sub 1,000 rated player at Worlds. Great finish for him in 41st place. And we also have Reed Frescura, pretty solid overperformance, 24 points above his rating. And then my favorite in the field as an overperformer, Gavin Babcock. Took 12th place, played with him at Utah Worlds last year. Great guy. He's on the road to becoming a star. Good performance across Worlds, 12th place finish.
Awesome. My favorite is Tristan Tanner out of the list there. Nearly 50 points better than his player rating on an event average. He did an incredible performance at the Las Vegas Challenge. It's really great to see him be able to do that. I think, and I did say this with Aaron, the courses suit certain players, and they're going to need to work through that to be able to do it regularly. But man, those performances were great. Josh, any thoughts there as we move into the next one, which is going to be underperformers?
I mean, the only thought is just fun. There's so much talk around like those finishing on the podium in MPO and FPO for good reason. It's fun to hear these names for people who actually had a great tournament, but obviously aren't going to get talked about in most contexts. But underperformers, yeah, you may not want to be on this list, but maybe it's a double-edged sword. If you're on this list, it means people actually expect you to play well, which is a good place to be. But underperforming is obviously not what you're looking for. For MPO, I'm really going to only give you 3 names, and then I'm going to give you an honorable mention, which is a 4th name, right? So we have Eagle McMahon. I mean, like, he's injured, but then he shows up at a European Open, lights it up, but he comes in 38th, second worst finish at Worlds ever. Look, Eagle's never actually performed like very well at Worlds. He's never even broken top 5. So that's an interesting thing to watch for Eagle. Again, we talked about maybe his mental game under pressure there, but interesting. And then Ricky Wysocki, arguably player of the year. He just had his worst finish in the last 10 years, finishing in 11th place. We saw a lot of emotion from Ricky. Started out just fine, but just could not finish down the stretch. And I think he felt that. And then Chris Dickerson, ties his second worst finish at Worlds in 12th place. And he just recently posted about just kind of really having a struggling stretch here. And it's frustrating to him. But those 3 names are names that probably plenty of people had picked to win the World Championships. And they didn't even break top 10, which is pretty amazing. And my honorable mention is James Conrad, because he actually has not had a great year. And even last year arguably was not great, except for his World Championship, which is unbelievable. He finished in 38th place. Many, statistically might have said that's where he should finish, but don't forget at the last 3 Worlds, he finished 6th, 3rd, and then 1st. So 38th place. Really, James gets the honorable mention there, unfortunately for him. And then in FPO, I'm going to pick 2 super obvious names, but just because they're so obvious. The rest, arguably speaking, maybe finished where, some might have picked them to. But Paige Pierce, a lot of pressure, a lot of self-imposed pressure, a lot of external pressure. Look, similar to Paul Macbeth, she had a 9-year trend of 1st or 2nd places and broke that by finishing 5th place. And look, 5th place is an amazing Worlds finish. So this is credit to the expectations of Paige about how good she has been historically. Finishing 5th is considered an underperformance for her. And maybe more obvious is Katrina Allen. 11th place is her worst finish at Worlds ever. For her by 5 places. She had not finished worse than 6th historically, and so 11th place for Katrina Allen. There were plenty of people who did not pick her to win, even as the defending champ, but nobody probably would have picked her to finish 11th in the field. And so unfortunate for them. It'll be interesting to see how these players rebound. They're all excellent players. Nobody's saying that they're washed up or on a downtrend, but they will have plenty of, fire under them to come out and finish the season strong.
I had Katrina as my number 2 pick, and so she definitely underperformed according to my picks. Let's talk about our final takeaway for the World Championships, and it's one of the best takeaways that the players had as well, which is cash money in their pockets.
Literal takeaway. They took it away.
Exactly. $200,000 record-setting world championship. Now, we go back to last year. It was $173,000 purse for the world championship. So we've eclipsed that by 27,000. I'm no stat mando, but $27,000 extra added there. Now, that was with this year $20,000 going to first place in MPO, and last year $16,500 going to MPO. Last year's FPO taking 10,000 home. This year 11,000. So we're seeing the increase for first place, and it's trickling down as well. Something to be noted here. I just found it interesting as I look back. Where did the numbers start changing? In 2019, we had $115,000 purse. We aren't quite double, but in 3 years' time, we've almost 85% or so. My quick math against Statmando, I apologize, to say a large percentage increase. I'll just put it that way. I'll round my numbers up to say that nearly double prize in the purse going from 2019 to current. But here's what's interesting. The numbers are getting larger. The Disc Golf Pro Tour still has the record set with the championship last year, $250,000 as the prize purse. I think that's the standard that's still trying to be achieved by others on the world's platform. Not to be taking anything away from this year's payout. What do you guys think about where the payouts have come from? As I hand it over to you, 1990 World Championships, $20,000 purse. Where are we at today? What do you think, Josh?
I mean, there's so many things that go into the payout. For us to sit on the sidelines and just expect it to go higher and higher, in some ways it should, because the economics around the situation clearly make that the case. But there's a lot of hard work that goes into raising sponsorships, managing event budgets. So I say awesome to the team to continue to increase it. There can be lots of factors for people to consider. I didn't check the FPO, so forgive me here, but I think I had heard that this ties Paul Macbeth's largest payout at one event ever with, I think, last year's USDGC.
Yes.
So it's exciting to continue to see the payouts increase. Obviously, there's a relationship between all of these things. As the sport grows, more money's injected, more players take the sport seriously, we get higher performance, more excitement, more sponsorships, etc. And so I think we're going to expect to see it continue to grow for a while, and that's a good thing for the sport.
Yeah, Aaron Gossage, second place, $13,500. That's a good payday for someone who's living out of their van. Dion, what do you think about the prize purses lately?
Yeah, this is so great to see. So I've got two thoughts here. One is good job, DD and the Emporia Kansas crew for putting together this Worlds and making it as rich as it was. So raising the bar in that regard and an overall super successful event. On the FPO side, I'll hit you with a few stats. Holland Hanley took third place. Congrats to Holland Hanley. And I didn't mention any FPO overperformers, but she would be my top pick there. And her third place cash was $5,600, which was more money than the winner at the previous World Championships 2017, 2016, 2018. So all three of those worlds, she got more than those winners, which were a mix of Paige Pierce and Paige Shue. So that is great. When the third place person in 2022 is making more than the winner just a few years ago, that's a great sign.
Yeah, and at some point, if you're a good enough performer, you won't need the salaried sponsorship. I mean, Paul Macbeth himself has earned $70,000 this year, and guess what? We would have said, and this is coming from a media bias, he's not having the best year that he could have. $70,000 in just the events that he's placing at. I think the payouts are allowing players to continue really seeking this as a career with a I don't mean to say it's subpar sponsorship, but they don't need the elite sponsorships to tour anymore. I think there's a lot to be taken away. We could dig into a lot deeper at another time with the payouts and how the sport handles that. But I think, again, as you said, Dion, commended to them as well. That's the second richest payout in disc golf history, only second to the last year's championship, as I mentioned, for the Disc Golf Pro Tour. Excited to see where the sport goes with these numbers. All right, we talked a lot of takeaways. Did we miss any? We'll try to come back and talk about them. Leave a comment for us. Maybe we can comment and chat with you on that. Otherwise, where are we going? The playoffs are something new to the sport. We've never had a version of playoffs in this manner before, but we're going to see it coming up at Smuggler's Notch. The Green Mountain Championships being the first tournament, or not tournament round, sorry, the first tournament round that is a playoff leading into what will be the MVP Open, which will be the final playoff event leading into the championships. And that's all coming up. But first, what's the Silver Series event we're getting into? Who has that information? Do we have a Silver Series?
Yeah, Butler County out
Thank
of
you.
Pennsylvania.
I apologize.
And by the way, obviously a Silver Series event, we don't talk about them much here, so we're not going to talk about them much, but there probably are some players, maybe not names we even talk about much here, but they're on the fringe. They're still pursuing an invite to these playoff events, so there still will be some exciting competition. Probably don't expect much of a thorough breakdown on our show, but if you're curious, go out there and look at the point standings. There are people chasing this last dash for points. It will make a difference for some players, depending how they finish here.
For sure. It's always good. As we mentioned, experience can't be bought. And for those players who are trying to earn more of it, there's another opportunity on their way to wherever they're going. So with that being said, everybody tune in to the Disc Golf Network. Be sure to catch the Silver Series action and then leading into all these playoffs. We're really excited about that. We'll see who moves forward and who doesn't make the cut. We're going to talk the storylines. We will be back here to do that. Thank you, everybody, for joining the show. Dion, looks like those are some stat zones. They can find those online, right?
You got it. InfiniteDiscs.com. Stat zones are out.
All right, everybody. Until next time, we'll see you out there. Have fun throwing.